Welcome to Leadership on the Front Foot, where we explore a wide range of leadership topics and we interview some of our community's best and brightest leaders. Now, Leadership on the Front Foot is recorded with a live audience, and I'm delighted that you could join us today. Please feel free to pose a question at any time just by hitting the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be able to pose those questions. The recording of this Leadership on the Front Foot episode will be available on Capital Partners website, on YouTube, and very soon on a podcast platform of your choice. So if you like what you hear, please subscribe and feel free to share the link with friends and colleagues. Now to this episode, I have always felt that the world would be a much better place if we valued real leadership more. And in the past few months, we've seen the best and worst of leadership around the world. This week, as cities across the United States and elsewhere convulse, we're reminded yet again of the importance of authentic leadership. The world around us is changing really fast, and our global alliances, as we know them, our trading partnerships are being challenged, traditional allies are turning inwards, and while we in Australia seem to be doing just fine at the moment, others in the world aren't doing quite so well. So if ever there was a need for front foot leadership, this is it. To help me unpack a broad range of topics today, I'm joined by Dr. Andrew Crane. Now, until 2017, Andy was the CEO of CBH, Cooperative Bulk Handling, for 8 years. Now, CBH is a $4 billion turnover business, Australia's largest exporter of grain. And under his leadership, Andy grew the business significantly and made a remarkable contribution to rural Western Australia, and the organisation continues to do that today. Since his retirement from CBH, Andy has developed a second career, and he's now a non-executive director of RAC SunRice, household name, everyone's got it in their pantry, Lawson Grains, Viridis Ag, and in his largest role, he is the Chancellor of Curtin University in Western Australia. So he's got a bit on his plate. Andy, welcome to Leadership on the Front Foot.
Thank you, David. Great to be here. Slightly daunted, but thank you very much for the invitation.
Just relax. Now, Andy, you humbly describe yourself as an average student, and yet the record shows that you've ended up with a PhD in agriculture. So I'm a bit quizzical about how that all happened. Why don't you kick us off with some insight into your early years?
Well, early years, I can go back right at the beginning. I was actually born at home in a small terrace house upstairs in the front bedroom, a one room wide property in Leon-on-Essex. It's not a badge of honour to come from Essex, but I'm very proud of that.
I think Jamie comes from there, doesn't he?
Well, it gets a bad name. I had a wonderful childhood. It was near the sea, and both my parents were teachers, which was great fortune because where we lived, we still had what's called the 11 plus, which is a fairly cruel experiment that all the kids at the age of 11 take a test, a one-off test, and they're divided between going to grammar school or secondary modern school, quite a young age to make that sort of differentiation in a one-off test. But Mum and Dad helped me practice those, and I did okay and went to grammar school, which I'm eternally grateful for, but found myself swimming in a very fast stream, and I was certainly Mr. Average at school, not very good at rugby. I didn't enjoy that much, but that's all we played, and came pretty much midway out of the class all the way through school. Crowned then by my A-levels, which would be equivalent of ATAR here, where I really messed them up and didn't get the grades needed to go to university, which pretty much everybody did. And I went to Polytechnic, which seemed as a second best, but in the end was good. The kick up the backside was good, that I felt what failure felt like. And I went and did environmental studies because it was something I enjoyed. And I feel so much for kids today trying to choose what to study when you're not vocationally certain or technically gifted in the arts or engineering, to decide what to study when there's so much pressure for it to lead to something. I was fortunate to go and do environmental studies, and at a polytechnic where they made us do a year working, so 2 years then a year working back for your final year, a sandwich degree, which I think is a wonderful format. And so I was a greenie, 1981 to 85, very early greenies, learning about climate change and recycling and all sorts of things. Yes, they're deep in the psyche. And I finished that, and I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I got the kick up a backside meant I studied hard and did okay. And so there was funding for a PhD, and why not? So I went and studied a PhD.
Now, you had a very interesting method of getting there.
Well, yes, bikes have always played a big part in my life. I mean, there are many mammals amongst us, but at school, I went to the dump and got bits of bikes and built bikes and sold them at school for pocket money. At college, I worked in a bike shop fixing bikes to earn money. And when I started my PhD, my first year of reading, the conference I wanted to go to, satellite remote sensing of agriculture, the World Conference was in Germany, and I couldn't afford to go. So I got my bike out and I rode there and back. And then when I came to do my 1 year of research, the issue was who's going to fund satellite imagery? And we all see Israel today as this wonderful, innovative country, and many people go there on innovation tours once they've worn out Silicon Valley. Well, that's where I went, because they were willing to pay for satellite imagery of crops, because they wanted to detect salt stress in crops early on. And so I needed to get to Israel. So I got a loan from the Jewish Widows Association, and I bought a motorbike and I rode there.
Which is pretty handy, because once you got there, you had your transport.
Yes.
And bikes still play a big role in your life, which is great to see. Now, I do want to just dig a little bit into this this satellite imaging and research, because by serendipity, you've ended up in Australia, and we're some of the best broadacre farmers in the world. Did you notice that we are? Like, I'm basking in their glow, so thank you to all the grain farmers out there. But tell us a little bit about that research, because you were very, very early. How has that evolved for farmers, and indeed for us as consumers?
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately it was trying to, at that time, any remote sensing of crops was from planes, taking infrared photographs of crops just to see if there was stress in them from all sorts of different things. We were particularly looking at salinization, and I'd read up that there were ancient civilizations completely destroyed by their soils becoming salinized, and it's still an issue today for societies. Water's important, but also poor water, and using that for irrigation is really troublesome. And the Israelis just wanted to take this technology from plane to space. Now, remote sensing agriculture is the latest thing, and I'm working with a startup in Perth called Laconic, who are doing infrared analysis of crops to help farmers optimize their decision making. And it's wonderful to see. I mean, I used to take all night to process an image, and a very crude resolution, whereas now the technology is absolutely wonderful. So it's lovely to be able to work with organizations that are still using that technology. And a couple of my Macquarie boards, the Lawson and British ones as well, are very invested in technology. And our grain growers in Australia are some of the most advanced in the world.
Mm. And on finishing your PhD, of course, you needed a real job. And that's a lovely entry point into the leadership conversation, because as I understand it, that's really where your leadership and your passion for it started.
Yes, well, I think passion. I think where I made my early leadership mistakes. So PhD, overqualified, decided not to be an academic. I wanted to go into business, and I had to join a business through a graduate recruitment program. So these people I was joining with were around 4 years my younger. I don't know, 4-year degree and a 3-year PhD. But I got one of the graduate programs, and they're amazing. And I wish there were more of them still today. I mean, it was such a great opportunity. A big conglomerate. I joined a malting business that made malt from barley for making beer and whiskey. And they moved me around the business in stints until they finally gave me a factory to run up in the north of England, and a maltings manager responsible for shifts and production at a young age, still relatively. And Yes, not only that, I was a Ponzi southerner running a factory up north, and learned a lot about leadership, or about how to not lead. Running a plant of people very experienced, much older than me, didn't need me particularly telling them what to do, or like it either. And so, yes, I learned a lot of leadership by bouncing off things more than doing the right thing, I would say.
What were the big lessons, Andy, that you recall from that time?
Getting back up each time I might have got something wrong. I had a couple of showdowns which I lost, and that, sort of realizing it's not a battle of wills. Listen more. I tried so hard at that, and it took a while. I would go to the mess room, and the place would go silent when I walked in. Here comes management. But in the end, gradually, through doing some of the job, thankfully I'd worked on shift and had done some of the really dirty jobs, so I knew what it was like to ask people to do them, sometimes rolling my sleeves up and doing it with them. But listening, I think, and hearing what was important to them, and their needs were completely different to mine in many respects, to get the factory running at its optimum. So yeah, I learned a lot. Thank God I had that 2 years running there. It's been great.
That's an interesting concept, isn't it? Doing some of the dirty work. As a founder, I've turned the lights on in the morning, turned the lights off at night, emptied the bins, made the cups of tea and so forth. So I can relate to that very strongly. How important is that for people in their leadership journey, being willing to, whatever it is, the small things, empty the dishwasher, or, well, I don't know what it might be, but
I was fortunate to having done those roles. They put me on shift for some time. So yes, really important to know what you're asking people to do. And then when you come on to bigger leadership, helping people understand how they fit in the organization. I think about leadership as I do, leadership of the business, of team, and of self. When you're leading the business, it's helping people understand, how do I contribute to that purpose? You're the leader you're the purveyor of hope, of where we're going, and strategy, but it's also, how do I make a contribution to something, especially in a large business like CBH? How do I do what I do every day, contribute to that? And CEO's job is very much about articulating that.
That's a tough one, isn't it? Because you feel sometimes in a really big organization, you can feel this big. How does that fit in and be meaningful?
Yeah. When your purpose is clear as an organization, I like starting with purpose rather than vision. Why we come to work articulating that becomes a lot easier to people when you're on the front line. And CBH was lovely. I enjoyed going out to all the sites. We had a lot of them. I did Undercover Boss a couple of times. That was quite fun. It was difficult. Most people knew who I was, but I did go and work on the sample heart and the weighbridge and the grid at times, as much as anything, to see the growers coming in and they not know who I was, and to hear what was going on about the business. Great fun doing that sometimes.
Was that for the TV show, or just because you thought it was important?
Just get out there, particularly when leading health and safety, seeing how that was being done at the sites, and not to catch people out, but just to really feel how people were embracing it and what we could do to do it better. Yeah,
that must be really tough in a big organisation. And I, just in this last few months, working from home and so forth, really hard to get a pulse on the organisation. But leading a very large organisation, it must be hard getting a pulse on the organisation most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, organisations use engagement surveys and all sorts of methods of how are things going, and I think organisations have worked exceptionally hard at doing that whilst people are working at home and getting those scores coming in. But yeah, nothing better than talking to people and being out. And as a CEO, you've got to divide your time between so many things, but still getting out, walking the building, or going out to sites and sitting and chatting to people. The toolbox meetings that I like to attend made the big difference to get a feel of what was going on. And I would say people at CBH, worked for CBH, were very happy to tell me straight to my face how things were going and how they weren't.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, some funny stories in that regard.
Now, I'm going to go back a little way before we go forward again. And I just want to ask you to reflect on another big adventure, because in 2001, you and Jane and the boys packed up and left the UK to come and start a new life in Australia. And as I understand it, you came with a one-way ticket. Now that's pretty brave.
Well, it was part of making sure it was a success, I think. So I was late 30s, had 12 years in this malting industry, which I loved. I had the best job in the world, travel the world and visit breweries. It was wonderful. I was selling, it was sales, and not everyone thinks that sales jobs are glamorous or particularly great for career, but I loved it. After, we couldn't sell malt until you knew how to make it, and there were technical visits to breweries. So I had a wonderful job, but I knew if I was stuck there, turned 40, I'd be there for the rest of my career. And an opportunity came for a role in Australia, and we thought long and hard about it, and then we said, okay, if we're going, we're really going to burn the boats. So we bought a one-way ticket, symbolically sold the house, cashed the super fund in. You may not have advised me to have done that, but I did that. All part of the symbols to ourselves that we weren't going to go running home when things got tight or tough. We bought a house the 10th day we arrived in Australia because we wanted to make a home, and we still live in the same suburb. So we really threw ourselves at it, and it's been wonderful. I'm a proud Australian citizen, and Western Australia has been very kind to us. We've definitely emigrated to Australia, but we've emigrated to Perth, particularly.
Yeah, I'm interested, just very briefly, in the biggest cultural differences you've seen
between the UK and Australia.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, look, I mean, I don't know. It's difficult to differentiate from my cultural experiences being me, but something we might talk about. But I'm sort of quite deferential and polite, and most people might see that as the typical English person. And the Aussies are, more frankly speaking, certainly in meetings, more outspoken and clear. Probably frustrate the hell out of people in getting to the point via a long, circuitous route. So certainly would feel that. And it's difficult to divorce what's me from what's cultural. I've seen cultural research done that the cultural gap between Australia and the UK is bigger than between Australia and the US in many cultural measures and hierarchy and respect for hierarchy and so on. So, but I've really enjoyed it. I think, again, Australia's been good for developing culture, has been good for my personal development and getting me to be a bit stronger and a bit more clear.
Yeah. Okay. Now we've got some really good questions coming in, and the way I run this is I try to fit them into the conversation. So I just want to make you aware that there's a few coming your way, but I want to pick up on a point you made about you being quite differential. I would describe you as, knowing you pretty well, I think I'd describe you as gentlemanly. Now, I think things are changing, but there is there's in popular culture, at least, there seems to be an image of the CEO being a bit hairy-chested, sort of out there fighting from the front, And I just wonder about that, because you're not that style of person. And when the opportunity to lead CBH came up, it was in 2009, I think, and so that's right in the middle of the GFC, so an incredibly tough time. Did you see yourself as a natural for that role?
No, and indeed, I spent some time even contemplating whether to apply, and I think that was just nerves about jumping off the trapeze without a safety net, sort of thing. Because once you're applying for an internal position, you don't get it. People say, well, of course you've got to leave, and all those sorts of conversations. So there was that going around, but there was this other question about, am I too nice to be the CEO of CBH? And indeed, I was part of a tech group, as you are, the Executive Connections group of CEOs who meet monthly. And we processed this, is Andy too nice to be the CEO? It was the subject for a bit of disembowelment by colleagues who could really dig into me. And, nice has some good aspects, amicable, sort of kindly, tact, good perception, but it has a dark side. And I think clearly the board of CBH were quite happy to appoint me, but some of that didn't really come out or as an issue for me until really digging into my relationship with the board. When I asked them, when we got some feedback, I got feedback from the board, and there were words like modest, polite, hierarchical, differential, and ingratiating styles, and summarising that got in the way of a better relationship with the board. And I think I took the purveyor of hope type idea too far in the boardroom, of always being optimistic and positive and not spending time on what's not right. And that can lead a board to worry that they're only getting told the shiny things. And I reflected on that a lot as a CEO and as I developed that, and why now I respond so positively, now I'm on the other side of the table, to CEOs who bring this great honesty about what's working and what's not working. And I think also that over-optimistic, I am a very optimistic, positive person. It can lead to being blind to risks, not spending enough time in the grey and the black and what could go wrong. I think it has benefits of momentum and positivity and people stretching for goals, but it has a downside, and we need to spend time looking at where the strength overdone's a weakness.
Yeah, and I think that's a useful point just to unpack a little further, because that's between a CEO and a board. But you brought up that concept of leading the business, leading the team, and leading self. Yeah, sorry, I missed the middle one. And the concept of leading self is relevant right through the organisation. The whole concept of leadership at all levels becomes really important. I wonder if you could share with the audience some of your inner thoughts, if you will, about the importance of leading self.
Yeah, so I use that business, team and self model to get me to make sure I think about each of the dimensions of leadership. Business is getting that strategy clear and busted into action so it can be done. The team, something else we could talk about. But self, ultimately, in the end, while it might be the last cab you get to because it's the more painful one, it is also where the other two are probably energized from. So getting those reviews, I've got a box full of personal reviews done over the years. They're quite fascinating to go back and see how much we don't change. And some people say, why bother doing them? Because we are who we are. But the more you see those common themes come through around a differential style, conflict avoidance is mine, of course. Maybe not, of course, but that comes through strongly. And I had to work really hard at that. Have some mantras in my head about, okay, it's this task conflict, not relationship conflict. But equally realised in my team when there was relationship conflict and I had to deal with that, which is dealing with his own conflict. How I brought my values to leading self, or value. I have the value of fairness. I don't need a long list. That's key to me. But again, understanding fair has two sides. It has, it's being fair with people, but fairness means you're honest with people. And it took a long time for me to wrestle these things to the ground and practice them. And still, I would still have, when you get stressed, those knee-jerk reaction back to type. And I keep going, no, I need to run towards this conflict, not away from it. Those things that coaches have helped give me over time to just trigger those the other bit of the brain to work.
Yeah, it's such a journey, isn't it? Leadership. It's such a constant, everyday commitment. And I just wonder whether enough people really make that commitment and really understand just how imperfect we are and how much effort is required to lead from the front foot.
Yeah, well, and to change. It's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a great question here from Peter. I suspect it might be all the way, if it's the Peter, I think it is, it will be all the way from New Zealand, which is nice. Question is, what was the toughest challenge you faced as a CEO, and how did you handle it? And would you have handled it differently with the benefit of hindsight?
Health and safety, I think, leading that. Whilst on the one hand, it's obvious and it's the first thing that you focus on. But it was a long journey for CBH, and understandable. Agriculture is not the safest industry in the world, and we recruit from and interact with people from agriculture. And taking that business on the journey was really hard from change management and consistency. People go, oh, here comes the latest initiative from the CEO, cross your arms, keep your head down, it'll go away. And you've got to be consistent about it. And we did make great strides. We got stuck a couple of times when the numbers came down and they plateaued. And, I thought, no, I just got to keep pushing the same levers. I don't want to change in case people think it's we've given up on that initiative. But we did have to change the way we approached it to get the next drop. but I did find myself at times in conflict with the board on it, and not for any fault of theirs. I realised I'd been leading it really strongly, but I'd left the board behind. I hadn't brought them with me and shown them, convinced them of all of what we were doing, because you make tough decisions that affect growers and the way that they deliver to sites and so on. And I found that a really tough point. But again, go back to basics, involve the board. There was a board review of health and safety which we shared, and it was part of that moving off the plateau and down to the next level was something I did with the board, and I've great learning and taken into my board career around that is keeping them involved. And a CEO and the chair are these two pyramids. The chair is representing the shareholders and the whole people funding the funnel of money coming in, and the CEO is representing the entire business. And these two pyramids balance on this relationship between the CEO and the chair, and the CEO and the team and the board. And that got pretty hot at times. But out of that came a lot of great things.
Yeah. This is related, and the question is, given the variety of your roles and I guess the complexity of them, so I'm just going to read this. What's been your strategy for managing the multiple demands that get placed on you, and how have you made time for yourself, for family, for study, for recharge? How have you found a balance along the way?
It's just not easy. I think the CEO really tough because you're being pulled all ways. So you've got to keep reviewing your diary. My EA, Stella, used to sometimes analyse the diary and categorise it and say how much time have I spent on different things and help to reorientate. Reserving time for exercise is pretty critical, but and the time for walking the building. She would go, right, Friday afternoon, you go and walk the building. She shuts the phone off you go. So those are some things I did. I think as a director, yes, I'm trying to do this from home without an EA. Organising everything is really tough, but I love it. I love the variety of boards. And in the end, we are, as a director, you might be on a board because you've been brought in for industry experience, but fundamentally we're there for the same common things. And so the commonalities of looking at a business, is the strategy clear, is the implementation clear as a CEO, right, the culture right, the compliance and performance, as the same tests and benchmarks, I think, for any board you're on. So the commonalities help to manage, I think.
You talked a moment ago about that pivot, the chair and the CEO. How tough was it for you to make that transition? So 2017, I'm sorry, you started that transition, and I know you were very disciplined. You said no to everything for 6 months or so, just so that you could completely decompress. But how have you managed that transition? You've been now you've been the boss, and now you're sort of supervising.
I do that. No, actually, a little bit of the reverse. I think, look, I was 56, 57. I could have gone for another CEO career, and many people asked, and it could have even tried both angles. But good advice was, well, look, you can really only chase one or the other. Otherwise, you're going to be confused. And so I felt, no, I want to start a board career. Start it younger because I'd like to have a career as a director, not just as a filler at the end of working life. And I'd like to chair things, and it takes time to build your career. And so I really threw myself at being a director. I can't really say I said no. I think I was careful about, obviously, agriculture. Your skill gets you some board positions, but I didn't want all agriculture, and I wanted diversity, and I was hopeful to get things on the East Coast, which I've been fortunate to have. That 3 of my boards are in Sydney. Because I wanted that diversity and enjoy, both happy with the travel, and I wanted the diversity of roles. So very systematic. I'm a highly organised person, spreadsheets, mapped it all out, they each have their own, and lots and lots and lots of networking. And I'm so happy now to be doing that networking with other aspiring directors and swapping notes, because it's a hard path to build that portfolio. And I think rightly so. Your boards need to choose carefully, but loving every moment of it.
How hard was it to make that leap? Like, you know, there's a lot of security associated with the paycheck of being CEO. There's a risk. I know there's a risk premium attached to that paycheck, but what gave you the confidence to say no? Because you're young, 57 at the time. What gave you the confidence to say no? I'm going to do this.
I just think I wanted to do it, and yes, it's certainly. I don't feel like, you know, as financially secure as I could have been or would have been if I had stayed or been another CEO gig. But I just really, really want to do this, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I think the transition to sit on the other side of the table, I went and reprogrammed myself. I went to the INSEAD International Directors Program, which is fantastic, just to be absolutely sure. But being a CEO, you are often patrolling that boundary of board and management with the chair. And I think I'd got good experience of understanding what that boundary is and the respective roles. I was really looking forward to then sitting on the other side of the table and being very careful not to play out of position, as one director always used to say. And I think that's been very helpful.
Has it been a challenge though, you know, not playing out of position? You must have found, well, I guess it's a question, have you found times where you've just been desperate to jump in and you've said, no, I can't do that?
No, I think only to the point of maybe saying, let's have a coffee with the CEO and say, look, you know, here's some things that I've used that have been helpful when we're stuck. But it is very different as a director. You are going in to a room of equals. Maybe there's been a few being there a long time and have got their particular chair they like to sit in, but it's a room of equals, and you need to come to a view as a group, and you've been brought in for your own view. So that's great fun in how you go about that, and I'm really enjoying seeing that process in a boardroom, and in a couple of where I'm chair, playing that role, which again you might think, okay, I've got some power like a CEO has of hierarchy, but a chair really is not. It's not about getting your own way. It's about getting a view out from the board, a consensus view. And I think chair role is really hard. I mean, it's hard workload-wise, but it's hard because you are maybe the last to speak, the last to give a view, the most. And when I come back to that conflict avoidance and being comfortable with the grey, spending time. I love to rush. I'm very process-oriented, want to get to the recommendation, get it approved, move on. But sometimes you need to take time to stop and think about the framing. Have we framed the problem right? And has everyone spoken? I've got to keep working hard at that.
Another nice question here that's come through on chat rather than the Q&A. The question is, have there been people who have significantly influenced you on your leadership journey? And I'm not going to ask who are they, but unless you want to share that, but more so, how have they impacted your journey?
I think there have been. I mean, obviously, sometimes working with a coach, particularly in that self-development, and finding someone who you really respect and can really get under your skin and needle you and hold you to account. I think my time with the tech group has been incredibly powerful. Having other CEOs who you know over time, that's been really powerful because you get a chance to bring a problem to the group. And if you bring that same problem to them, a year later, they go, well, hold on, Andy, you brought this problem a year ago. You said you were going to do this and you haven't. So that feet to the fire guidance is really good. I mean, one-off conversations you can have with great people, but they've been really powerful. I mean, talking of couples of conversations, I mean, I went to visit Richard Goyder when I first became CEO. I followed, my predecessor was a huge figure in the industry, being the CEO for a decade or more and grown through the business. And I went to see him and asked him, what's it like following, a great, and with Michael Chaney, and very generous with his comments and advice. And likewise, I went to talk to him about building a board career. And so people are very grateful, very great with their time and offer great advice. So I think it comes from the group and some trusted individuals. On the CBH board, we had non-grower directors who had a board experience and CEO experience, and they were also very helpful to me as a new CEO reporting to the board in how to present to the board well.
I want to join a couple of dots, Andy. Earlier on, we talked about some of the challenges of being a leader and how it's a constant learning and a constant evolution and understanding of yourself as much as anything else. And then you just in that last little piece, you've talked about the importance of coaching. And I just wonder, is there enough coaching going on in the business world these days?
I think in well-organised businesses with development plans, good HR functions, OD functions, then yes, I think coaching's on offer. It was in the organisations I was in. It's about whether people take it up and whether they, be it formal and offered by the business. I think maybe there's not enough people just going out and searching for it off their own bat to help their personal self-leadership journeys. So maybe that's not enough. And I have found people incredibly generous with their time when you ask. For some advice and views, or someone, a listening post to look at your personal reviews and ask those tough questions. So I'm sure there could be more. I mean, always.
Interesting question too around personal development, around how much of a responsibility is it of mine and how much of it is of the organisation that I work for and with. And I think we both know the answer to that. If you have any sense of belief in self-leadership, then it's yours. I just want to make that point for any of our younger listeners, because the world will get out of your way if you take the first step.
And same with your career aspirations. Some people would come to an annual performance review and say, "So what's my career at? Where am I going, or where's my next move?" And the boss would say, "No, what you should be telling me." So yeah.
Now, I want to shift now pretty significantly to get your perspectives on some of the shifts that are going on in the board roles. So you've got agriculture, you've got RAC as well. So that's a very, very different, it's quite a diverse set of responsibilities, but that's quite domestic RAC as I understand it. But in agriculture and higher education, there is a lot going on. In my intro, I talked about supply lines and some of our traditional trading partners shutting the gate on us. Can you just step us through some of the things? Let's deal with agriculture first, and let's move to higher education, because that's probably the more contentious one.
So I was very fortunate to be involved with B20 when Australia hosted the G20, and the B20 was a business advisory group advising the Prime Minister and the Treasurer on sort of the key areas to try and get agreement on. And I was on a couple of the task forces, infrastructure and trade. It was the trade one, having spent a lot of my career in international trade, that I found so interesting around, the progression of multilateral trade agreements, plurilateral, bilateral agreements, and how much the world had achieved pre-GFC and post-GFC in breaking down trade barriers and what that had done to stimulate growth. But we do seem to be at a period of retraction from that very fast. I think Diane last week said about, COVID has accelerated trends that were already there. And I think that's absolutely the case, that, this has accelerated what we were worried about of a trade war, Cold War, countries' alliances breaking down. I'm still a strong believer in free trade. I think it got a bad name. The free trade really did stimulate the world's economies and help them recover from the GFC. Just that the wealth wasn't distributed well. Inequality grew, wage rises for many were stagnant for over decades. And so it got a bad name. And it's getting worse now. When you see the countries' reactions to COVID, it's almost like there's our national toilet roll moment where countries are going, I'm worried I'm not going to be able to get hold of X, so we're going to store more of it. We're going to turn our supply chains inwards. We're going to grow our own. And it's a natural and understandable reaction. No different to us going to Bunnings and buying seedlings and wanting to grow veggies in the garden. during COVID, partly occupation, but partly to maybe feel like I've got some veggies growing. The only problem is like in the big world, our soil might not be right. We may spend twice as much as what it would cost to buy them. And you need 8,000 square meters to feed a family of 4 for a year if you're going to grow it. So the grow your own, hold your own, make your own is understandable, but it doesn't get us very far. I'm still a believer that, good economic theory, we should grow what we grow well and then import what we don't. And spent much of my career talking about some food deficit countries, Japan, Taiwan, who import a vast proportion of their calories, but others, Middle East, elsewhere, about the difference between food security and food sovereignty. And food sovereignty is this knee-jerk reaction, I need to grow everything myself. And it just can't be done in many countries, even if they wanted to.
Yeah.
Or it's not wise. So the question is, how do we keep food security alive and well with trusted trading routes and partners and open borders and open low tariffs? In agriculture, tariffs have also been a disaster. I grew up my career in Europe with the common agricultural policy. A floor was set of price, so growers could never go below that. Well, some bureaucrat had to set what that price was every year, and that was pretty arbitrary. But then any grain coming into Europe had to pay a tax to come up to that. Any grain getting exported from Europe had got a subsidy to be able to compensate for the fact you paid too much. Complete bastardization of the system. You end up growing the wrong things. You don't innovate, and you're coming back to how innovative West Australian growers are. Farm income coming from government in Australia is 2%, whereas the OECD average is close to 18%. So our farmers are totally exposed to the world market, but it's good. They may wish for some more support, but it's good. It means they're growing and operating in totally exposed to the world markets, and it means they have to be innovative.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point just to ask you about the China barley. You know a bit about barley, and what's that really about?
Well, there was a barley anti-dumping case going prior anyway, so it was, but it might just be a current tool. So there are those who are saying it's not related, or it is related to the diplomatic spat. For me, China's a major importer of malting barley. There is some feed barley, but it's always been a big importer of malting barley. That was a job I came to do. There's a big brewing industry. At the moment, beer was depressed by about 30% due to COVID, so they don't need so much anyway. But they were the biggest buyer of malting barley, and that's not an easy grain to just go and find another market for. You can find other markets for feed barley, but they're much lower paying. And so it has a big impact. I mean, certainly the businesses I'm involved in, the 2 farm funds, we looked at what we could switch out. We were 2/3 through seeding when this happened. So you can switch some out into other grains, but it'll have a big impact. But yes, I much prefer these things to be dealt with diplomatically. Of course, that'd be my style rather than a megaphone diplomacy, because tit for tat gets us nowhere. And our own businesses, Australian businesses and public will be impacted in between.
So I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out. I'm hearing from you that your view is that free trade is not dead, but we're in a bit of a recoil moment. How do you see that, particularly for ag, but I suspect that's true of many other products? How do you see that playing out in the post-COVID world? Will just reality strike us and we'll get back to normal? How will that work?
Well, much as we don't want to have to choose between China and America, and diplomats quite rightly say we shouldn't have to, and we don't need to, and we can do, we can walk and chew gum, etc., etc. I think alliances will change, and we just need to make sure that we're in a group big enough that they can have free trade within it and make sense. So maybe, I can't stand in the way, much as I don't like it, stand in the way of a trade war or a Cold War. But if we just look back to the previous Cold War, then what were those alliances that formed that would trade, work together, and share common goals? And I think we need to work on that and ensure it's big enough. It's great to see the Prime Minister working with India, particularly for Western Australia. We look across the Indian Ocean, and there's a big world out there of markets and opportunities, and I'm sure partners who would want to work with us, and who have food security issues, and maybe other commodity security issues. We've a lot to offer in that, and we need to. But I would like to see that free trade mandate and intent operate within that group.
So let's talk about education. You've got a bit going on there. And it's been interesting, as I understand it, education, I think, is our 4th largest export dollar earner. And for a very prominent export dollar earner, the tertiary education sector has been coming in for some real criticism. I'd really love to get your perspective on that. And then clearly some universities are really, really struggling from a financial point of view. Just help us unpack what's going on there.
I'm probably going to sound a bit defensive, and I think I'll just play the card saying I am being defensive here. I think that some articles written about universities recently turning it into a bit of a blood sport, accusing unis of being too deep into China. That may well be, but there are plenty of other industries in Australia that are deep into China. Yeah. And international students alone is the 38 billion value to Australia. And the add-on that through all the stimulus to the economy in property, rentals, hospitality, I reckon there's 250,000 jobs that are created by virtue of the foreign students being here. And we're competing at a world-class level against some big countries with wonderful universities and doing bloody well at it. We should be proud. And we're competing at a brain game, which is also where we should be. I know there's talk about reshoring and bringing manufacturing back, but let's be frank, we need to change some fundamentals to make that work. But we're doing well. Of the 41,000 PhD students in Australia at the moment, half of them are international students, and they are doing the work that contributes to research papers and publications and research breakthroughs. The group of 8 unis reckon that every dollar that goes into research has a $10 benefit in the private sector. So there's so much good about Australian universities. Okay, maybe a need for a bit of reorientation, but equally, I don't think we should be giving up on China. We should be working at the relationship with them. They have some amazing universities publishing great works. They're rising the research rankings. And we have a lot to learn from them and partner with them. And I know at Curtin, we're doing that, as well as universities around the world. Curtin is specifically, we are a bit more diverse. Half our foreign students form about a quarter of our population. We teach half of those overseas at our overseas campuses, and that has helped us weather this storm much better, and there is a model there for us to continue to follow. So Australia doing wonderfully well with campuses in other countries delivering Australian degrees. So we can be successful. We should be proud of it as we are of our iron ore industry and our grain industry, and the country should be supporting it. I have to say, the federal government has been very positive in this regard in understanding its economic benefits and willing to consider how do we get the international student load back up and running.
What do you say, Andy, to the accusation that having such a high, and I get Curtin University has 25%, other universities have way, way, way more. But what do you make of the accusation that having so many international students has dumbed down university education for our domestic consumers?
Look, I really don't think it does. I fully understand. Let's go to the heart of it. We might have kids who study and work in tutor groups, and they say, the student I was with didn't speak English as well or whatever, and it was hard. But if we look at the cultural contribution that international students make to Australia, it keeps us connected. It keeps us connected to our backyard. These students, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, soon will be coming from Africa. I, in my business career, have met business people in Southeast Asia who are beneficiaries of the Colombo Plan, the original Colombo Plan, and came to Australia and studied here. And they have been lifelong Australian files. And 2 of them I know well established, partly established the campus in Malaysia and wanted it to be a Curtin relationship. So it helps us in business links, diplomacy. There are times when the cabinets of countries are made up, a majority of Australian graduates. So the value is enormous, and it can't be traded away by saying it's not dumbing us down. I say the PhD students show that half the PhD students are international students. Consider the economic side of saying, okay, like all businesses, don't get addicted to the flow of money if it can't be sustained, or you need to diversify. That's good strategy, and I think unis are wrestling with that right now. But it doesn't mean turning off the international student flow. It means we're being successful.
So with the borders closed, what happens next?
Yeah, there's going to be superb competition for domestic students. So between the universities, absolutely, is a game on, and that's great and healthy. And a great healthy university sector competing is really valuable. Like I say, no, the federal government's really looking at this hard, and how do we get that flow back? And that may be, we may get international students welcomed back here prior to tourism through very strict protocols. That be like many industries that are lobbying government, going to government with protocols to allow their industries to open up, and the tertiary sector is no different. And I think with the right protocols, we can do that. We did it with returning students prior and during this. Remember, the universities have been wrestling with this, with Chinese returning students before COVID became an impact on the wider Australian society. So we're ready to welcome them back with good protocols and ensure they and domestic students are safe.
Let's wrap up this COVID specific piece with a little bit of advice or perspective. We've been encouraging our clients, as you know, to take what we're calling a rationally optimistic approach, where we know things will get better, but we know the road, we're rational enough to know that the road is going to be very bumpy along the way. Can you give us some insight, your views of how you think Australia will emerge from this pandemic?
Well, it is within our hands, but to do well, but it is based on individual decisions. So when you're talking with clients, talking about the economy as a whole, then there's definitely going to be winners and losers. The well-used phrase now, the rising tide won't float all boats. We all went down equally, but when the tide comes in, it's going to be very different, and it's going to be up to those who reimagine. We've been talking about moving from crisis to recovery, but now to reimagination. And much as many would want things to revert to norm, and I think there will be a strong tendency to revert to norm, people will want to go back to work for good reason, but be able to work at home now and again. But there will be things that won't go back completely that way. There's research I was reading recently about people shifting brands and sticking that way. But the online shopping will come back, but not back to original levels, or won't reduce. So it's the businesses that look at that and say, well, how are we going to benefit? How are we going to be different? It's a wonderful chance. We've all, I think, of boards and in businesses, welcomed the nimbleness of decision making. We're flushed with that excitement of nimble decision making in crisis. It does help to simplify the world. So it would be, one, how do we retain some of that from an operational point of view in businesses? Different directors going, so we had IT projects that were going to take 2 years and $2 million, and they've gone in a week because they were necessary for remote working. So we know we can do it. We know we've got the brains to innovate, and if we do enough research about the way that consumer habits and business markets are changing as a result, it's the ones who reorientate, reimagine for those markets that will be successful. So I think in that whole, there's going to be winners and losers. I'm not into trying to invest in one and not the other. I'll take your advice on the rest of that, but I want to be on boards that are reimagining and see this as an opportunity.
Andy, I think we will start the wrap up there, but it's been wonderful to have you with me today discussing such a broad range of topics. But I do have one, what I think is a great final question for you. And that is, what is the one piece of advice? So, sorry, for the audience, Andy has two lovely sons, Tom and Ben. What is the one piece of advice about leadership that you would give your boys as they take on the world?
Leadership, I think we learn too late how important values are. So, think about what your values might be. What do you hold true? Start to try and define it. and come up with the value or values that you won't budge when no one's looking or when it costs you money. So I think we leave it too long to start to define those things in ourselves. So that would be one. If I can have a couple, one.
Oh, you can have a couple, absolutely.
Would be to listen more to people. Just it helps with that emotional intelligence and to be able to adapt your style, leadership style, to who you're operating with. Know yourself, know them, and then know how to alter your style to get the best out of others. So, and that comes through listening. Would be a couple I would impart to the boys if they were welcome to listen to me.
Indeed. Andy, thank you so much for being my guest. We've ranged all over the place, and you've been very, very generous with your insight and your advice. Thanks also to our audience at home, and thank you for your questions. I really hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Leadership on the Front Foot. And as I mentioned earlier, these videos are available on YouTube. You just need to go to YouTube and search Leadership on the Front Foot, and you'll find them very quickly. If you'd like to catch up on previous episodes, they'll also be available as podcasts on your favourite platform. Now, in our next episode is going to be all about coaching. The best athletes in the world all have a coach. And, many people in other aspects of their life don't. And I'm going to be really exploring and unpacking why that is. So thank you for joining us on Leadership on the Front Foot. That's all for today. Thanks again.